With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, we're going to take a look at why her reign is extremely significant for the nation of Israel. Because you may not be aware, but the British were extremely significant in the founding of modern Israel. Which is why in this video, we're going to go over this chart, the formation of Israel, the British connection, in order to demonstrate in this other chart how the Queen's Platinum Jubilee is extremely significant for this Hebrew year, 5782, because it's a Jubilee year. And so, with that said, welcome back to Supernatural by Design. My name is Jared. I pray that you've been having a wonderful and blessed week, beloved, and that God's grace and peace is with you. Saints, we are almost out of here. And I believe this video affirms that, which is why I highly recommend that you watch this all the way to the end, as there are a lot of fascinating connections that defy statistical probability. Also, real quickly, if you could do me a kind favor and please hit the like button, comment down below, and share this video. By doing so, you are helping to support this channel, and it gets it into the YouTube algorithm so more people can watch it. Alright, now with that said, let's begin the video. And to do that, let's bring back up this first chart. Now if you notice, on the top row I have the Hebrew years listed out, followed by the Gregorian calendar years right below that. And then of course, each one is separated by 7 years, or a shemitah cycle. Now, going back in time to 1896, this was the founding of the World Zionist Organization. And this organization would be key in getting the movement rolling for a reestablishment of Israel in modern times. And again, this began on a shemitah year. On August 29th of 1897, so at the very tail end of our Hebrew year in 1896, or 5656, which is interesting. 5656 is an 1111 connection. But nonetheless, the World Zionist Organization would be fundamental in pushing and creating the Balfour Declaration. It was the inspiration behind it. Now, what made the Balfour Declaration unique? Well, it was the Zionist push confirming support from the British government for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And this document of support by the British government was on 11/9 of 1917. So it was a Hebrew year, and it was also an 11 date connection, as 11/9 is our 11 date. But that was when it was officially released to the public, because just 7 days earlier is when the declaration was received by the Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour of the United Kingdom. And this date was 7 days previous on 11/2. And so here we have an 1111 connection because the 2 is a base number for the number 11. And then just 7 days, so a number 7 connection, we have 11/9, an 11 connection. And this all occurs, remember, on a shemitah year. So this is very significant because of these dates landing where they land at. Not to mention, I believe as a result, God brought peace back to the earth, because nearly 1 year to the day of 11/9, 1918 would be the end of World War I. And here again we have an 1111 connection. That's just my conjecture. I'm not saying it's true, but it's definitely very interesting. But anywho, that is the significance of the Balfour Declaration and where it lands at, numerically speaking, and on a shemitah year. But moreover, this Balfour Declaration would be instrumental in the British mandate for Palestine, another historical document ultimately providing the land for Israel to have as a national home. However, this wouldn't fully be seen through until the end of World War II, and Israel finally becoming a nation in 1948 because of the Balfour Declaration back in 1917. which is also interesting, the timing of Israel becoming a nation. Because if you look at the graph, I have 1924 in yellow and 1973 in yellow, with yellow signifying a Jubilee year. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we take the Hebrew year of 1924, 5684, and the Hebrew year for 1973, 5733, each one of those Hebrew years is evenly divisible by 49, and how we know it's a Jubilee year. By the way, if you want to learn more about the Jubilee year, check out Leviticus chapter 25. Now, halfway in between those two Jubilees, taking 49 years and dividing it by 2, interestingly enough, is 24.5. And as an example of an 11 connection, using the decimal. But it also comes out to be 1948.5. Hence why God has dubbed it for me as the halfway Jubilee pattern, marking 1948. And since we're here, it's important to note that Isaiah 11:11 fulfills this prophecy of Israel being regathered and demonstrates another unique connection to the number 11. And so it wouldn't be doing this pattern justice without demonstrating all these 11 connections. In fact, in this chart I've put together, so far we have seen 11 connections within mathematics, historical dates, underworld events, and Bible prophecy. You see, the number 11 touches all of these categories. It's one of God's prime numbers. Get it? Prime numbers? Like the number 7. Now, I'm not going to get into primes here, but that is a very interesting topic to study through the lens of the number 11, but ultimately falls in the category of mathematics. But nonetheless, the number 11 is extremely significant. And of course, it wouldn't be called the 11 channel if I didn't mention all of these connections, as these are the anchor points that God uses for me in showing how these patterns work. And why, coming back to our Jubilee chart, 24.5 is an anchor point, along with a Bible prophecy anchor point of an 11 with Isaiah. So, we have Israel back in the land. Everything's good. Now, Queen Elizabeth would begin her reign, get this, in 1952, on a shemitah year, and a very unique one too, because it's the very first shemitah year that Israel could celebrate, being back in the land. Isn't that fascinating? And so it would be at this point forward, going into her 70-year reign. And I'll flip to the next chart, highlighting the Queen's reign in yellow, as she was the first British monarch ever to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. Granted, the British define Jubilee a little bit differently from the Bible. The point, however, is that she is the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. But that is just for a monarch to celebrate a 70-year reign. You see, she became the longest reigning monarch back in 2015, and 2015 was also another shemitah year. So at 3 significant points throughout her reign have all landed on shemitah years. From her entire reign as queen to 2 historical date markers, becoming the longest reigning British monarch in 2015 and the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee in 2022, and coinciding with a Hebrew Jubilee. That, saints, is supernatural by design. And get this, just one last little thing. She reigned for 70 years, 7 months, and 2 days. Obviously, there's a 7 connection here, but the 2, that's the 11, as the number 2 is the base number of 11. It's a function of log-base numbers. But even more interesting is the repetition of the number 7 and 11 within this pattern. And what I find super fascinating about this, saints, is this. we all know that we're waiting for Daniel's 70th week. Is it coincidental that it has been 70 years of shemitah cycles, potentially ushering in Daniel's 70th week? Meaning 70 years to the 70th week. That's just my conjecture. I'm not saying it's true, but it is fascinating to think about as a play on the number 70. And as a play on the number 11, the 70th week, if this is true, would begin on the 11th shemitah cycle. Oh my goodness, and just to further provide additional evidence, I had to add this part into the video, and that is the 77th UNGA, the UN General Assembly meeting that happens every year. The interim Prime Minister of Israel, Yatzir Lapid, backed his support for a two-state solution, which coincides with significant steps being taken with the Third Temple. The recent 5 heifers would be an example of that. But my point is that it was the 77th UNGA meeting marking this historic announcement. And 77 is 7 times 11. The same exact relationship that we would see at the end of the 11th shemitah cycle, as that would be our first 70 years plus 7 years, totaling 77 years. And again, 7 times 11. Isn't that interesting? This pattern with 7s and 11s. Once again. And the topic that he addressed is literally the main focus of Daniel's 70th week. Jerusalem, the land. Remember, the shemitah cycle is a covenant between God and Israel to redeem the land for Israel. That's one hot thing off the press. The next hot thing off the press, the UK, Liz Truss, is now weighing the option of moving the embassy of the UK to Jerusalem, just like Donald Trump did. And her plan to do this, and this coming out, it's a shemitah year again. So we see this pattern of British support for Israel on shemitah cycles. It's very interesting. And that both events of the UNGA and Liz Truss's announcement happened on September 22nd, 2 times 11. But that's not even the exciting part. Check this out. It also is the exact day of the fall equinox. That, saints, is very significant, as it follows a similar pattern that we have seen on this channel, involving equinox and solstices, but with celestial events. And therefore, because these two events, which are profound on many levels, I now want to take the time to explore a unique connection to solstices and equinoxes that are very relevant to this topic. And so this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it is connected. However, if you want to fast forward, then you can check out the next chapter and just skip to that section by the chapters broken out in the description. But this will take about 10 minutes to explain, but it's very useful. And we'll also cover something else that's a little miscellaneous, but also tied to it. Okay, so let's jump into this. So I want to lay out to the right the two events that occurred on the fall equinox of this year. And then on the left side of the chart, we have our two celestial signs that both occurred on solstices in the same year, which, by the way, is extremely rare, and how we know that they are significant and have purpose. God timed these with precision for a reason. With our Ring of Fire summer solstice eclipse as our first celestial event, and then our second one is the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction that happened on the winter solstice. Now, I do have 2 videos for both of these events, and I'll leave the link down in the description for more details. However, I'm going to assume that you've already seen both of them. Now, the themes that we discussed in those 2 videos covering these celestial signs, the summer solstice was for war, and the winter solstice sign was for the rise of the Antichrist. However, recently, God has placed on my heart that these are symbolic as chronological events, meaning war will usher in the rise of the Antichrist. Now, this 1-2 combo is triggered by something. And what I want to suggest, my conjecture, is that the fall equinox 2 events is that trigger point. Because one way that we know that is, remember those anchor points tying the significance of the number 11? Well, it just so happens to be that the Antichrist winter solstice conjunction is 641 days from the fall equinox of this year. And the date duration between 6/21 of 2020 and 12/21 of 2020 is 183 days, a 1-11 connection. And therefore, both of these 11 connections identify these celestial solstices as being significant and important to this fall equinox. Now, what does the rise of the Antichrist have to do with our fall equinox? Well, if you recall, in the book of Daniel, it's the Antichrist that affirms the covenant. Hence why the Prime Minister's declaration of a 2-state solution, proposing it, supporting it, is that red button. Exactly what the prophet Joel tells us in chapter 3. Okay, now here's where it gets very interesting. So, in that summer solstice eclipse video, God had highlighted that a war would start on the Day of Atonement. And saints, as crazy as this sounds, a war did break out on the Day of Atonement between these two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and indirectly Turkey and Russia, as Turkey provided the drones to Azerbaijan, changing the art of warfare in general, drone warfare, whereas Russia ushered in the peace deal between the two countries. But moreover, why believe that these 4 countries are somehow wrapped up into this, also including Iran, as that was significant to the eclipse as well. But they too are also tied up in this region, as they are supporters of Armenia. But moreover, keep your ears peeled to these 4 countries, especially Azerbaijan. But not trying to get lost into the details, my whole point is that this war broke out on the Day of Atonement. Alright, now check this out. And it just so happens to be that 9/22 of 2022 is a Jubilee year. And so we have Day of Atonement, Jubilee year. Saints, did you know that a Jubilee year is marked on the Day of Atonement? That's right, according to Leviticus 25, and marked by a trumpet, the last trumpet to be blown 10 days after the Feast of Trumpets, and this only occurs on a Jubilee, meaning once every 49 years. Could this be the last trump that the Apostle Paul was referring to? I don't know. We will see. And interestingly enough, there's an 11 connection here. By placing the Day of Atonement on the civil Jewish calendar, it is always the 10th day of the first month, an 11 date. Isn't that interesting? Which is why I would argue that this Day of Atonement will have something very significant. Not necessarily on that day, but around that day. The month of October. Or November, because it's an 11. Or it could mean that the entire 50th year, as this one has started on 9/27, will be marked with war. But this time, I would argue, on a global scale, as that's what's also being indicated in this video with this number pattern of dates with World War I and II matching the same pattern as the invasion of Ukraine, and therefore a second pattern confirming the theme for this Jubilee, making this Jubilee very significant. In fact, the very last Jubilee year happened in 1973. Did you know that was the War of Yom Kippur? That's the Day of Atonement. So this Jubilee is very significant. War is coming as a result of this fall equinox two-state solution. Not to mention, we are in the 119th Jubilee year, as this Jubilee starts it. And why is that important? Because that's an 11 connection. Just as we're getting ready to go into the 11th shemitah cycle. So our big loop is pointing to 11, and our small loop is pointing to 11, making this Jubilee and this shemitah cycle very significant. But moreover, that is the solstice and equinox conjecture. But the miscellaneous but yet relevant topic that I want to quickly cover before we get back to the Queen, but also tied to the Queen, is what happens to the UK and to the US during the 11th shemitah cycle. Because, saints, arguably, the passing of the Queen marks the passing of the Western empires of the UK and the US, because the US is born from the UK. Not to mention, this is the exact same conclusion from Pluto's return, marking the rise and fall. The American Super Shemitah pattern also is pointing to this, as well as the grand alignment. Remember in that video? The planetary conjunctions at the very end of that chart. So this is a converging theme represented across independent patterns. And just as we've seen, the UK is tied to Israel. The US's fate is also tied to Israel, just as we've seen demonstrated in that longest lunar eclipse video. I'll leave a link in the description below. However, this conglomerate of the UK and the US is attributed to the Prime Minister's support for moving the embassy, just as the US did. And because this is tied to the winter solstice, that something significant for the UK and the US will happen during the winter time. And a great place that ties this theme together outside of these celestial signs is actually found in IPEC Goat 2. As we see the Star of David during the wintertime surround the Statue of Liberty, with the freedom arm falling, and therefore pointing to something happening in New York City. The exact same connection that God had connected in that 2020 Neowise Comet video. I'll leave a link for that in the description. It's interesting that all three of these signs happened in 2020. The two solstice events and the comet. But moreover, just wanted to explain what I believe will happen within this shemitah cycle, the 11th shemitah cycle, for the UK and the US. However, before jumping back to the Queen, I do ask that you please take all things before the Lord first. He will confirm or deny these things. Don't just take my word for it. Okay, but now let's go ahead and jump back into the Queen's Platinum Jubilee and highlight another Israel connection to the Queen. Because did you know that? It just so happens to be during the year of 2022 that we have the Israeli tetrad, the famous 4 blood moons that follow a sorrow cycle are the exact same blood moons that occurred in 49 and 50 and 67 and 68, marking the regathering of Israel, the recapture of Jerusalem, and next on the prophetic timeline, the next temple. And it's found within this moon pattern that you discover that. So I'm certainly not surprised by the recent events with the 5 red heifers, which, by the way, I have a video coming on that. So definitely stay tuned and subscribe if you're new. And so moreover, we have celestial signs also in conjunction with the Israeli Platinum Jubilee, marked by the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, beginning and ending on Shemitah years, as the British were key in the formation and founding of modern Israel. Hence, why her passing signifies something very significant for Israel in the near future. In fact, here's another unique connection that ties the Israeli tetrad to the Queen. So if we take a look at the tetrad, the very last moon of this pattern occurs on 11/8 of 2022. Now, just 1 year ago, on 11/8 of 2021, this Time magazine cover came out. The last call. As you see, the heads of state sitting down during a winter time, and what looks to be a very ominous background. But I want to draw your attention to the Queen, because if you notice, she's the only cardboard cutout. Why is that? Is this a foreshadow of her passing? That by the time the fourth moon of the Israeli tetrad occurs, the Queen is no longer here. And so I don't find it coincidental the timing of this magazine cover matching to the exact day 1 year before the final moon of the Israeli tetrad. And so moreover, this cover ties in the Queen of England with the Israeli tetrad. Again, tying these two nations together. Okay, now let's just add one more detail, coming off the tail of that I Pet Goat 2 video. Because a subscriber named Jesus Saves shared this information with me. So thank you very much for sharing that. And if you have any other additional information, you can always comment down below or you can email me. But anyways, check this out. This is what he pointed out. That the child name, according to the animator, Heliofont, is Lily. And Lily, interestingly enough, is a nickname for Elizabeth. In addition, he pointed out that the checkered floor is symbolic of the anniversary of 9/11. And if you take that along with Lily, who appears to slump over or fall asleep, again, in the Bible, falling asleep is another way to refer to people passing away. The Queen herself passes away 3 days before the 9/11 anniversary, to which we then see her drop the apple, which is symbolic for Israel, and then it divides. Isn't that interesting? Because isn't that what we just talked about earlier in the video with the 77th Assembly of the United Nations? And in another way, also demonstrates the connection between the UK and Israel. And so once again, this scene that we talked about in the previous video becomes very relevant once again. Which begs the question, is a rapture very close? Because that's what the first video was about. I would articulate yes. But moreover, after everything that we have seen so far in this video, there's definitely a connection between the UK and Israel, as we've seen in the Israeli tetrad, I Pet Goat 2, historically with the Balfour Declaration, and the Queen's reign, lining up on shemitah cycles. Not to mention all the number 7 and 11 connections. So definitely a lot of interesting things on the horizon. But with that said, this is where we're going to end this particular video. I pray that this was helpful and useful, and that ultimately this provides hope in realizing that we saints are very close to the rapture of the body of Christ, and that we will soon be with Christ in the air. And with that said, saints, I love y'all, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.